Hello, welcome. Thank you for being here. In this video, I wanted to comment on whether or not you can run every day and hopefully give you a decently complete answer to this question. Because this is something that seems to trip a lot of people up, especially when they first start getting into the practice of running, whether or not this is good, whether or not this is bad, whether or not this will hurt you, things like that. And so, in short, the answer is yes. There's nothing inherently about running that prohibits you from doing it every day. Now, that doesn't mean I'm saying you can run to a very high intensity or run a very long distance, whatever that means to you at this point in time. You shouldn't do that every day, but you can do, short to moderate, easy-ish pace distance every day and be perfectly fine. So, for instance, to put this in a bit better context, let's imagine that you are someone who can run 4 to 5 miles at a given time. And let's say that's a long run for you. Like you do that and you're tired, your legs feel pretty cooked. If you're that person and you run a half mile to a mile every single day, nothing bad would happen to you. And as I sort of denote here, this bullet point, one of the things you should be thinking about when you're designing a run program from a volume perspective is the total weekly volume that you are doing. And once you have identified what the appropriate weekly dose of volume is for you, it probably does not matter too much how you split it up across the week. So in other words, let's say that you've identified 7 miles across an entire week is the appropriate dose for you for this upcoming week. Whether you do 1 mile every single day of the week or 2 sessions of 3.5 mile runs, and you progress that week over week, the total weekly volume the same way in terms of percent increases, the results you'll see over time are probably going to be exactly the same. Again, assuming same pace, same everything else. Now, again though, it's not like every single run workout you can do is exactly the same and has the same sort of recovery demand and fatigability and things like that. So like a long run, again, that's very subjective. A long run really depends on whatever that means for you right now. A tempo run is not max effort running, but it's also not easy. So think about like a moderate effort somewhere in the middle. And then max effort, and I mean, that could be sets of 2-minute max effort runs. That could be a 20-minute max effort run, anything like that. So a long run, tempo, max effort, those you probably shouldn't be doing every day. Walk run intervals, that's something that either I use in people who are just starting out to sort of acclimate and get used to the feeling of running, or in order to force a progression of distance if we're talking about something super long. But short distance, really, I mean, again, subjective, depends on what that means for you, but that you can reliably do pretty much every day and just be fine. Moderate distance, as long as it's a very easy pace, probably maybe a bit more tenuous, but again, a short distance you could do every day. And if that's just something that works out better for your schedule as opposed to doing less longer runs, then that's totally fine if the total weekly volume ends up being the same. Now, again, though, a good overall run program should have some type of combination of all these sort of workouts in some way, shape, or form over the period of time. Not all of these you can do every day, but you can do some type of running every day and be fine though. Now, this is a little bit of a opinion. I'd say I don't necessarily have great evidence to give you in regard to this specific claim that I'm about to make. But for people who are newer to the practice of running, I tend to like to recommend a higher frequency program with a lower dose per session. That might mean every day, that might not mean every day. It really depends on the person's schedule. But using the example we talked about before of, let's say, 7 miles in a given week, if someone is newer, and let's say somehow it works out to be that 7 miles is the appropriate dose, I think the 1 mile per day dosage would be better than the 2 times per week, 3.5 mile run dosage. And the reason for this is that you could, theoretically, infer that a higher frequency of practice of running is going to have a more rapid skill acquisition of good technique of running. And this is something that I will say for almost every form of exercise you can do, is that in order to really hone in your technique and get good at technique on any given exercise, the best thing you can do is just do a lot of it. I mean, there's no real cue that anyone can give you that's just going to make it click. I mean, that does exist, but it's better to just do it and do it a lot. There are certain parts of your brain dedicated solely to the task of figuring out how to improve technique and movement economy in your daily movements. And again, the idea of technique being a valuable thing is that if your technique is better, then theoretically your running economy is going to be better. And what that is that basically the amount of energy you expend with every step you take is going to be less. So if you're going to expend 500 calories on a given run, a person who has better technique and better running economy will go farther and run better than the person who has worse technique. So if you imagine that your performance in running is going to improve based off your true general fitness, as well as your technique in the task, then using the strategy that's going to sort of expedite your technique acquisition that much more is probably going to be to your advantage, especially in the beginning. Now, once you sort of get further down the line, I think this is going to be a bit less important. Nevertheless, again, this is sort of my opinion in terms of what I've noticed working with people and what I would recommend to you if you are someone newer to the practice of running and if you've had this question about running every day. Now, just to go back a bit, because one of the reasons why someone would ponder the question of whether or not you can run every day is usually in regard to whether or not that's going to increase risk of injury. Pretty much across the board, what causes injury, pain, or anything of the sort is doing too much too soon, too often, too frequently, or something like that. Too much of a dose relative to what you are ready for right now. So in regard to running, you can bracket it into 3 different doses, which is going to be different for everyone. And when I say dose, what I mean is volume, intensity, things like that. So you can do a dose of running that is not enough and it's not going to change your body in any way. You can do a dose that is just right, that's going to stress your body, but not too much, and it's going to meaningfully cause your body to adapt and improve in its fitness and everything else. Or you can follow a dose that is too high, and you probably will still get better at running, but in proportion to their injury risk will increase disproportionately to the adaptations that you will receive. So as you may guess, your goal with any form of exercise really is to stay in this sort of middle dose right here, not too low, not too high, because this is, generally speaking, the idea here is that your capacity and your fitness will sort of equally pace with the stimulus you're putting on your body. So, sort of as I say here, if the dose progression outpaces your body's improvement in fitness or capacity, that's when pain is going to crop up, injuries are going to crop up. Dose of your training increases proportionally to your capacity, then you are going to see the results that you're after without too much injury risk. Now, of course, as you can hopefully appreciate, there's a good bit of thought and other variables that couldn't go into determining what constitutes the right dose. But in generally speaking, this is the framework that's going to dictate whether or not a form of exercise is risky in regard to injury or not. So what the best way to progress, in my opinion, tends to vary depending on person to person, because what your sort of lifestyle looks like, what your schedule looks like, what your other forms of training that you might be doing looks like is going to influence what the best way to progress is. But generally speaking, I think progressing your total weekly volume more slowly than faster is a generally good starting point. And you can increase the rate at which you progress until you start to feel like it's too much, and you can sort of feel that out. A common rule you'll see here is what's called the 10% rule, which is different than the second bullet point. I'll talk about that in just a sec. But basically the idea that you want to progress your total weekly volume each week no more than 10%. So in other words, let's say you're doing 7 miles per week as your running dose for this upcoming week. You want to run no more than 7.7 miles in the following week. I think even using a sort of 5% weekly increase is probably a better starting point for most people in order to keep yourself feeling good. But again, people vary in terms of what's going to be best for you. Now, what might even be better than that, though, this is based off a recent study that came out looking at this exact question, is not letting any single run exceed 10% of your longest run within the past 30 days. So let's say, for instance, you ran, your longest run is 6 miles within the past 30 days. You don't want to have a bigger jump than 0.6 in that case of any single run past that. And this is part of why focusing on total weekly volume tends to be a bit more productive in my opinion, because if you are more focused on progressing your total weekly volume, and you're sort of extrapolating that out across all of the runs across the week, then your percent increase of any individual run is going to be a bit less, and you're not going to have any single spikes in any single session. And then max effort running, tempo running, stuff like that really is its own other discussion. Good to have it in somewhere in the week, but I usually program it no more than 1 time per week. Really, to do this justice would require its entire own video. So I'm not going to opine on that too much, but really I wouldn't focus on volume as the factor you think about for max effort running too much, as opposed to intensity progression. So that's all I got for you here. Hopefully that is helpful, interesting, or somewhere in between. If you have any questions about anything that I said throughout this video, do not hesitate to comment them down below, and I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you soon.